Hey everyone, so it's the day before New Year's Eve in 2020, and I wanted to create this video to kind of reflect on this past year and share some personal lessons that I've learned and some things that I am excited and looking forward to in 2021. I think if we were to use one word to describe Christmas this year, it would probably be strange. A lot of families weren't together and there's a lot of tension. I think relationships have been tested in 2020. There's still a lot up in the air with the election. Contrary to what the media is sharing, there's still a lot up in the air. And I think that it's just the climate is still kind of uncomfortable. A lot of people are still uncomfortable, maybe anxious, maybe feeling lonely because of not being with their loved ones. But I think it's safe to say we're all looking forward to 2020 coming to an end. So in this video, I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned in 2020. I have learned a lot, and I think that it's always important to get a takeaway. And at the very least, 2020 has stretched me. It has opened my eyes to learn more about people. I've learned more about the relationships that I have. And I want to share these lessons with you. I'm going to get a little personal in some of the things I'm going to share with you. So stick around. I think you'll enjoy this video. And if you do, please give it a thumbs up. So let's start. All right, so let's recap 2020. I remember New Year's Eve last year. I don't think my husband and I made it to midnight. We put my 3-year-old son to bed and didn't probably stay up much later than that. So New Year's Eve last year was pretty uneventful. But the new year started out actually really great for me. At the time, I was a lifestyle blogger. I had been blogging for several years, but I feel that it was in the winter of last year or the beginning of 2020 when I started getting collaborations. I started working with brands, actually getting paid for my content, and everything seemed to be, really off to a great start. I was excited about 2020, but then, as you know, within a few weeks and months, things just changed. My son's daycare closed, so he was home with me, and being a 3-year-old only child, he also had nobody to play with. So here we are in New Jersey, living in, during the winter, him having, nowhere to go, no one to play with. I wasn't able to do as much blogging and collaboration work. Not to mention, things seemed to be at a standstill and I wasn't getting as many offers either. And then in March of last year, I did have a health scare. I wrote about it. I put it on my blog. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but long story short, everything is fine now. But that was really challenging because, I didn't know at the time what was going on. And this was at the height of COVID. This is when, hospitals supposedly are crazy crowded. I recall as well going into 4 or 5 hospitals because of my health issue and noticing that these hospitals were actually kind of empty. So that's what first started me asking a lot of questions about COVID. I just didn't believe that we were getting the honest narrative. I started talking to more doctors and, over time, I just was skeptical of what the mainstream media was sharing. Simultaneously, as time went on, and again, my health was fine, it was more of a scare, thank God. I, being home now with my son in the middle of winter, took to TikTok. I got on TikTok. And it was more of like a hobby, something to do when he was napping each day. I had a couple hours and I needed an outlet. And again, I'm stuck at home. So I got on TikTok. I started doing lip syncing and then eventually got into creating my own characters. And within 6 months, I grew an audience of 100,000 followers. And I believe it was my Nancy Pelosi impersonation. People were loving my political impersonations and my signature this sound effect that I did with Nancy Pelosi. Everybody loved it. So anyway, that was all great. So by the summer, I was starting to feel like, okay, I found something new. This is great. And in the interim, I was sharing a lot of information about what I was learning on TikTok. I recognized that TikTok was providing information that the media was not. And I'll give you an example. When Black Lives Matter was going on and the media was telling us, oh, these protests in the cities are very, tamed. They're not, they're relatively peaceful. Well, I was seeing actual video of people uploading on TikTok what was really going on. And it was like, wait a minute, I saw total discrepancy in what the mainstream media and their narrative. So mind you, now we have COVID and Black Lives Matter. And on a personal note, I was sharing with my friends and acquaintances on my personal Facebook page. I was sharing a lot of the TikTok information that I was getting. And it, again, is going against the mainstream narrative. Now, we all know by now that a large majority of people, including our friends and family, are hooked to the mainstream media because what have they been doing during 2020 when they're in lockdown? They're watching the media constantly. So over time, I'm recognizing that there's more and more of a hatred building for the president that I voted for, the president that I see as the most pro-life, pro-Israel, pro-Constitution, pro-religious freedom, pro, strong economy, national borders, kept us out of war, peace with Middle East. Yes, I'm talking about Donald Trump. I have been a supporter of his as soon as he took office. I almost didn't vote for him in 2016, but I'm glad I did because I recognize all the work that he's done. And yet, I'm noticing now the climate in my relationships. Not, by the way, my closest relationships. I'm happy to say, my immediate family, my extended family, even my in-laws, and who are mainly liberal. And my in-laws and I even had like a little, kind of like a debate, whatever, until we decided we're not going to go there anymore because it's not worth it when it comes to family. And I'll talk more about that later. But all that to say, it wasn't with my family or my spouse's family or even my closest friends, the friends that I grew up with, the friends that I've had since college. It was relationships that I've had, I would say, were formed over the past 20 years, even into the last year. Okay, so there was one relationship in particular of someone that I got to know in 2020. And where I'm going with this is that I recognized that I cannot put my trust in just anybody. Christians, especially, I've noticed, have disappointed me. And I've noticed a lot of judgment. I've noticed people just, cutting me off, or just not friending me or not a friend of mine on Facebook anymore, which is, fine. But like you go to look one day and you're like, oh, I wonder if so-and-so is still, no, they're not there. So, I think a great lesson that I learned in 2020 is I would rather be true to myself and to be honest and share who I am and allow my relationships to flourish from there. And God really allowed 2020 to be the year of, and I said this in a recent video of mine, 2020 was a year of exposure, not just politicians or legislatures or the Supreme Court or this, that, or the media, but I think with every individual. I learned a lot about so-called Christians. I learned a lot about so-called churches who tiptoe around speaking up for things like pro-life. They are not doing what I believe is critical right now because our country is at such a critical point right now where it can go in two different directions. And one is with God at the center of our country, which is what America was founded on, or removing God from the equation. That's how I see it. That's how a lot of Christian conservatives see this. And I think it's really shameful that a lot of churches have been quiet on what's really going on. Okay. Nevertheless, many of us weren't even able to go to church at the beginning of the lockdown period. And after it, now I'm in New Jersey, our churches are open. I have been attending a church and it's fine, but at the same time, I'm also watching evangelists that are prophesying about what's happening right now. And I've learned that God still uses prophets. God is still speaking through prophetic Christians, through either dreams or, he is still speaking to us. He is not quiet on the scene. He is very much involved with what's going on. And so I would say over the past few months, I've been watching Dutch Sheets, his brother Tim Sheets, Lance Wallnau, Hank Kinnaman. There's a couple others, but those are the main people who I've really, been interested in what their message is. And they're very consistent. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. So we're into summer now. Okay. So summer I was doing my TikTok and the impersonations really took off and my audience grew and I was happy with that. I felt like, this was maybe my calling, because I knew it had something to do with social media. I knew that my personal calling had something to do with leadership, sharing content, because I am part of that silent majority. I am a conservative. I am a Christian. I am living in the 21st century as a conservative where a lot of us are afraid to even share who we are, what we believe in. So I also started doing some commentary within my comedy on my TikTok. And by August, TikTok shadow banned me. And what this means is they stopped showing my content to new audiences. So once I hit that 100,000, now I'm at I think 123,000, whatever. The only way people see my content is if they're already following me or by word of mouth. So if someone shares my, content somewhere, but TikTok will not, show my content anymore. And I went back and forth with, am I still going to keep putting content on TikTok? People were like, oh, join Parler, join these other conservative platforms. And I'm like, okay, but they're not exactly the same. I mean, they don't have the bells and whistles. They're not as established. It's not as user-friendly. It's just not. But nevertheless, I have been sharing some of my content on Parler and Clapper as well. And I would say I put out maybe 2 or 3 videos a week right now on TikTok. So I'm really not on TikTok that much anymore. So then we get into the fall season and election season, and I continue sharing my commentary on what's going on with the election. And a lot of people who were already following me, granted, were very interested because they knew that I had faith. And at that point, I recognized that we can't even place our trust in Fox News, which I thought was a more, balanced media station, and then the whole thing with the Supreme Court and all the hearings with what really is going on with the voter fraud, lost faith in the Supreme Court. And ultimately, I really believe that God has taught me that this isn't about the Supreme Court. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about people. It's about, his will for our country. And he is the only one who is capable of exposing whatever needs to be exposed. And we can only do our part by sharing our faith with one another, praying for our country, obviously still doing our homework. We have to kind of cross-reference and, I don't believe anything on face value. I have to hear it and see the actual event. I have to compare notes. I do a lot of, homework in the background. But, and at the same time, I don't get too overly involved and obsessed with the day-to-day events because it looks discouraging. It can really look discouraging. And I know deep down inside that God is, in fact, going to expose what needs to be exposed. It's December 30th today, and it hasn't happened yet. But faith is believing in what is not seen. And I mentioned this in my last video that 2020 is a year to really, for God to be sifting those of us who are believers and true believers and put 100% of our trust in the Lord and God alone, or those of us who are, like Peter when he was walking on the water. To Jesus. Whenever he took his eyes off of Jesus and started looking at his circumstances, what happened? He started to sink. So I believe that, 2020 was a year for me personally to, really reflect and reprioritize my relationships, to let go of people who, were not really, loving me unconditionally because I don't agree with 100% or share or speak or believe in what they believe in, and I've also learned to not place my trust in, the media or people, and my faith in the Lord has really grown a lot. So that is a major takeaway for me. Again, I had a health scare back in the spring, and it was a really difficult time for me, and yet I believe that God has given me good health. And I believe that we can pray for that. I believe that, the Bible tells us there's many verses that talk about how God can give us good health, when we place our trust in God. I'm not afraid of COVID. I am not afraid of it. Do I believe it's real? Yes. If I had underlying health conditions, if I was in my 80s, would I be living a different lifestyle? Absolutely. But, I am fairly healthy. I'm, under the age of 70. And so I still live my life. I think a challenge that many of us will continue to have in 2021 is there will still be a disagreement in how one chooses to live their life with this pandemic, okay? In a couple days, it's going to be a new year. I'm excited for what God's doing. I'm choosing to trust that God's doing something extraordinary. My hope for you is that you feel encouraged, that you can take away lessons that you've learned in 2020 and apply them, and that you grow in your relationship with the Lord. First and foremost, I assure you that your other relationships will fall into place, and the ones that are not meant to be there are just going to be, considered a favor if they're, not, these people aren't part of your life anymore. But now I have a special announcement. So my goal for the next few weeks is to evolve what I'm doing right now, which is this YouTube channel, into a podcast. So I will be setting up a little more of a studio per se. And what my goal is to start sharing more conversations with other 21st century conservatives regarding everyday issues and topics that we go through. In other words, I don't want to just be doing all the talking. I don't want it to just be scripted this way. I have decided that I want to invite other voices and kind of bounce, other ideas off of. And so this is going to evolve into a podcast. So stay tuned. I'm still working on getting a domain name and setting up a little more sophisticated equipment. And I'm really excited about it. If you can do me a favor in the comment section, list some of the topics that you would be most excited about. And if there's someone who you feel would be a good co-host with me, because I do want to invite other people to participate in this podcast, tag them in the comments, and hopefully, who knows, we can maybe hook up and I can have some really great special guests on as well. So that's my goal for 2021. And if you did like today's video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing and stay tuned for what is coming in the near future. I wish all of you a happy and wonderful new year. Here's to 2021 and some really amazing things that I know God will be doing.